Nobody believes it the first time they see it on the map. That is the first thing the outgoing ranger told me when I took over the posting. He spread the internal survey map across the table in the briefing room, the one with the actual boundaries marked, not the version available to visitors, and he pointed to the northeastern corridor where the terrain designation shifts from backcountry wilderness to something the official documentation calls Variable Geological Survey Area. He said, "Look at this map." Then he pulled out a second map from a manila folder, older, the paper gone soft at the folds. Same region, same scale, different boundaries. The area on the newer map was larger, not by a little, by roughly 300 acres over a span of 11 years between surveys. I asked him what caused it. He said the official explanation was measurement error combined with updated satellite imaging technology, producing more accurate boundary data. He said it with the flat voice of someone reciting a thing they had been told to say, rather than a thing they believed. Then he rolled up both maps and handed me the folder and told me to read everything inside before my first solo patrol. He was gone by the end of the week. I never spoke to him again. My name is not important for the purposes of what I am about to tell you. I will say that I have worked in land management and conservation for 11 years, that I hold a graduate degree in ecology, and that I am a precise and methodical person by both training and temperament. I do not embellish. I do not speculate beyond what observation supports. Everything I am about to describe is documented in my field logs, cross-referenced against the historical records held in the district archive, and in several cases corroborated by the testimony of at least one other person who was present. The posting is called the Northeastern Thermal Corridor. It does not appear by that name on any public-facing park material. Visitors who hike near its boundaries encounter signage that cites ongoing geological research and asks them to stay on designated trails. The signage is accurate, technically. Research is ongoing. It has been ongoing for decades without producing any published findings, which is either evidence of extraordinary scientific caution or something else, depending on how comfortable you are sitting with unanswered questions. I am going to tell you about 3 things: the boundary, the trees, and the night in March when my field partner and I made the decision we are still not certain was the right one. The boundary first, because without understanding the boundary, nothing else makes complete sense. The Variable Geological Survey Area covers, at last official measurement, approximately 2,400 acres of thermal and subthermal terrain in the northeastern section of the park. It is bordered on the east by a ridgeline, on the north by a creek drainage, on the west by a service road, and on the south by what the survey maps call the transitional margin, which is the edge that does not stay where it is put. I want to be precise about what moving means in this context, because the word implies something dramatic, and the reality is more unsettling, precisely because it is not dramatic. The boundary does not shift overnight. It does not advance visibly in any single observation period. What happens is that the markers, metal posts, driven into the ground at surveyed intervals, are periodically found to be inside the area they are supposed to mark the edge of. Not all of them, usually 2 or 3 per year, in different sections, with no apparent pattern to which posts are affected or when. The standard protocol when a post is found inside the boundary is to resurvey that section and install a new post at the corrected location. The old post stays where it is, slightly inside the new boundary, which means that if you walk the transitional margin, you will periodically find old posts standing in the ground at intervals that no longer correspond to any official line. They accumulate over time. I have counted as many as 4 generations of posts in a single 50-meter stretch, each one set slightly back from the one before it, a row of small metal monuments to an edge that keeps retreating. Retreating is the right word. The area is not contracting. The boundary is moving outward. Whatever is inside is taking up more space. The geological explanation offered in internal documentation describes the process as thermal substrate expansion, a gradual increase in the area of ground affected by subsurface heat activity. This is plausible. Thermal fields do expand. Yellowstone sits on one of the largest active volcanic systems on the planet, and subsurface dynamics here operate on scales that make human observation feel like trying to understand an ocean by watching a single wave. I accepted the thermal substrate explanation for approximately 4 months. Then I started paying attention to the trees. The transitional margin runs through forest in several sections, mixed conifer, lodgepole pine, and spruce primarily, with the dense understory that characterizes mature Yellowstone woodland. Trees on the outward side of the boundary are normal, healthy canopy, standard spacing, the kind of forest that looks the way forest is supposed to look. Trees on the inward side are different, not dead, not damaged in any way I can categorize using standard forest health assessment criteria. They are simply different. The bark has a quality I found myself describing in my field log as polished before I had a better word for it, a smoothness that is not natural to conifers of this species and age, as though something has been in long contact with the surface. The branches on the lower third of each tree are absent, not broken, not diseased, cleanly absent, with healed-over growth scars that indicate the loss happened gradually over a very long period. The root buttresses, the exposed roots at the base of each trunk, are larger than normal, spreading further across the ground, interlocking with neighboring trees in a network dense enough to be visible from standing height. I sent photographs to a forest pathologist I know at a university in Colorado. I described what I was seeing without specifying the location. She wrote back within 2 days and said she did not recognize the presentation as consistent with any disease, pest, climate, or fire damage pattern she was familiar with. She asked for a tissue sample. I sent one. She came back 3 weeks later with results that showed the cellular structure of the wood was normal, healthy, no pathogen, no unusual chemical markers. She said, and I am quoting her directly here, "It looks like the trees have been growing in close contact with a large, slow-moving object for a very long time. The kind of pressure adaptation you see when a tree grows around a rock, except distributed across the whole lower trunk, rather than localized." She asked what was in that forest. I told her I was still trying to determine that. I want to address something directly before I continue, which is the question of whether what I am describing could be the result of bison. Yellowstone has a large bison population, and bison are well documented to rub against trees, to create worn patches on bark, to affect forest understory through grazing and trampling. I considered this. I considered it carefully, and I examined the evidence carefully, and the answer is no. The pattern of wear is too high on the trunks, beginning above the browse line and extending upward in ways inconsistent with bison rubbing behavior. The absence of lower branches is too uniform across too many trees, and perhaps most significantly, there are no bison in the northeastern thermal corridor. The ground temperature in the subsurface thermal zone is incompatible with the soil conditions bison require for grazing. They do not go in there. Neither do elk. Neither, as far as I have been able to determine through 6 years of careful observation, does almost any large mammal, except the ones with a paycheck and a field log, which brings me to March. My field partner that season was a ranger named Torres. She had been with the Park Service for 8 years, previously stationed in the Southern District, transferred to the Northeastern Corridor the same season I arrived. She was experienced, calm under pressure, and deeply skeptical of anything she could not measure. We worked well together precisely because she pushed back on my interpretations and I pushed back on hers, and somewhere in the middle we usually found something that held up. It was a night patrol, which we ran once per month in the winter season to check the remote sensors and assess any overnight activity at the transitional margin. The temperature was -12 Celsius. Clear sky, no moon, the kind of darkness that makes your headlamp feel like a small apology. We were running the eastern section of the margin, about 2 miles from the service road, when Torres stopped walking. I stopped beside her. She said, "Do you see that?" It was not a question. I looked where she was looking, which was into the interior of the corridor, north and slightly west of our position, maybe a 1/4 mile into the trees. There was light, not a point source, not a beam, a diffuse illumination, faint, sourceless in the way that ground fog sometimes catches ambient light and glows without any identifiable origin, except there was no fog. The air was dry and still, and every star was sharp overhead, and the light inside the tree line was doing something that took me a moment to identify. It was moving, slowly, no faster than a person walking at a relaxed pace, perhaps slower, moving northward, parallel to the tree line, deeper into the corridor, not toward us. The color was difficult to name. Not blue, not white, somewhere between the two with a warmth underneath it that the color itself seemed to contradict. Torres had her camera out. She took 17 photographs. I have seen these photographs. In 12 of them, the light is a smear of overexposed pixels that could be anything. Lens flare, sensor artifact, light from a distant source, catching moisture in the air. In 5 of them, it is clearly a distinct object or phenomenon, maintaining consistent form and relative position across sequential frames taken seconds apart. Torres said, "We should follow it." I said, "The protocol is to document and report." She said, "I know what the protocol is." We stood there for a moment. The light continued its slow movement through the trees, unhurried, consistent, as though it had somewhere to be and was confident of arriving. I told Torres we would pace it from outside the boundary. We would not cross the transitional margin. We would maintain our position on the outward side and move parallel to the light for as long as it remained visible. She agreed to this. We walked north along the boundary for 11 minutes. The light maintained its position inside the tree line, roughly equidistant from us throughout, as though it was aware of the boundary in the same way we were, and was observing it from the other side. I noted in my log that I was uncertain whether this parallel movement was coincidence. Torres, when I said this aloud, said she was also uncertain. Then the light stopped. It did not go out. It did not fade. It stopped moving and it remained stationary for somewhere between 30 seconds and a minute, and then it descended. That is the only accurate word. It went down, slowly, evenly, as though sinking into the ground, and then it was gone, and the trees were dark. We stood at the boundary for a long time without speaking. Torres said finally, "I want to cross the line and look at the ground where it went down." I said we would come back in daylight. She said that was the right call. Neither of us moved for another few minutes. We came back in daylight 2 days later, when the weather allowed. We found the location by triangulating from our GPS positions during the sighting. We knew approximately where we had been standing. We calculated the distance and angle to where the light had descended. The ground at that location was warm, not dramatically, not enough to melt the snow cover from above. But when Torres pushed a soil thermometer probe through the snow to the ground surface, The reading was 11 degrees Celsius above the ambient temperature of the surrounding soil at equivalent depth. She took readings at 6 surrounding points for comparison. None of them showed the anomaly. She photographed the thermometer readings. She took a soil sample. She documented everything with the thoroughness of someone who understood that thorough documentation was the only argument she would have when someone with a desk job looked at her report and reached for the simplest available explanation. The soil sample came back from the lab showing elevated sulfur compounds and an unusual concentration of certain thermophilic microbial markers consistent with deep thermal activity. Consistent with, not diagnostic of. That phrase does the work of keeping the explanation inside the boundaries of the professionally sayable. I want to tell you something about working in a place like the Northeastern Thermal Corridor for an extended period. You arrive with a set of frameworks, scientific frameworks, procedural frameworks, the accumulated common sense of your training and your experience. These frameworks are useful. They are not wrong. But they are built for a world that operates at human scale, at human speed, within the range of phenomena that human beings have had enough time and enough encounters to develop language for. The corridor operates at a different scale. The boundary that moves is not moving at a speed you can watch. It is moving at a speed you can only detect by comparing one careful measurement to another careful measurement taken years apart. The trees that have been shaped by contact with something are shaped over time scales that make the concept of an event meaningless. Whatever produced the warmth in that patch of ground, whatever moved through the trees with its cold blue light, it is not doing anything quickly. It is not doing anything urgently. It has time, in a way that I do not. I think that is what eventually gets to every ranger who works this posting for more than a season. Not fear. We are trained for fear. Fear has protocols. What gets to you is the pace of it. The sense that everything you are observing is a single frame from a film running at a speed your eyes cannot follow, and that if you could somehow slow yourself down to its tempo, if you could step out of your human urgency and your human time scale, you would see something continuous and purposeful and utterly vast. You would see it, and you still would not have a word for it. I filed my report on the March sighting through standard channels. It was logged, acknowledged, and assigned a case number. I received no follow-up communication. This is consistent with what I understand to be standard handling for anomalous observations in the corridor. They go into the file. The file exists. No one seems to know exactly what to do with it. Torres transferred to a different district 8 months after the March incident. We stayed in contact. She told me once, in a message I have kept, that she thinks about the light regularly, that the thing she cannot get past is the way it stopped when we stopped, the way it moved when we moved, not matching our pace, she was careful to say, not mirroring us, just aware. She wrote the word aware, and then wrote, I know how that sounds. I wrote back and told her I knew exactly how it sounded, and that I had stopped caring how it sounded somewhere around year 3. The boundary markers continue to be found inside their own lines. The survey team comes out once a year and resets them, and the survey team does not ask the questions that the resetting implies. Or if they ask them, they do not ask them where anyone will write down the answers. The trees inside the margin continue their slow, polished growth, their lower branches absent, their roots interlocked across the forest floor in a network I have started to think of, for lack of a better framework, as deliberate. The sensors record their low-frequency oscillations on cold, clear nights between February and April, rhythmic and patient, rising from a depth the equipment cannot accurately measure. And once, in my 5th year, on a morning in early October, when the frost was new on the ground, and the light was coming in low and gold through the eastern ridgeline. I was standing at the transitional margin running a routine waypoint check when I felt, through the soles of my boots, a single, slow pulse from the ground beneath me. One pulse. Then nothing. I stood very still for a long time. Then I wrote it in my log, the time, the location, the duration, the sensation, all of it precise and measurable, and entirely insufficient for capturing what it felt like, to stand on the skin of something ancient and feel it acknowledge, just once, just briefly, that you were there. I am still on this posting. I am still filing my reports through standard channels. I am still walking the boundary, measuring the posts, photographing the trees, logging the sensor data, doing all the work of careful observation that the job requires. But I have stopped expecting the frameworks to catch up to what is in that corridor. Some things are older than the language built to describe them. Some things move at a pace that makes the word move almost meaningless. Some things know you are there and do not need you to know what they are. The boundary will be resurveyed next spring. The measurements will show what the measurements always show. Someone in an office will write thermal substrate expansion in the appropriate field and close the file and move on to the next item on the agenda. Out in the corridor, the ground will be warm despite the snow. The trees will stand in their polished silence. And somewhere below the frost line, below the soil, below the rock, at a depth the probes do not reach and the surveys do not map, something will continue doing what it has been doing since before the forest existed, since before the mountain existed, since before anything that we would recognize as a beginning. Patient, unhurried, present, and if you stand in the right place on the right cold night, and you are quiet enough and still enough to stop being the most important thing in your own story, you might feel it through your boots. One pulse, just enough to let you know.